Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It was nearly a year ago that saw the passing of Mike Pretl. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. He spent 15 years living on the Eastern Shore after leaving Baltimore. He was a strong advocate for many causes, but especially for the environment. Of course, he was also an activist who fought for other issues such as racial justice, gun safety, and universal health care. He was always busy helping many grassroots organizations get their nonprofit status and providing his legal expertise. Mike also put his energy into local democratic politics, and of course he was a regular guest on Delmarva Today and a friend of Delmarva Public Radio. On October 25th, at its annual dinner, the Wicomico Environmental Trust will be christening the Mike Pretl Award for Environmental Advocacy. The organization has issued an award for such efforts in the past, but Mike was someone who fought each day to preserve the earth that we now walk on. In our studio this morning, his wife, Michelle Hughes, also John Grout with Wicomico Environmental Trust, and Karen Bell with Big Sisters. And welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about, I would share with you, how did you meet Mike? What was all that about?
I met Mike at a meeting of a group interested in finding a candidate to run for Attorney General.
Okay. So what was your first meeting like?
I thought he was an idiot.
Why is that?
A lot of times when you first meet Mike, Mike was a very enthusiastic, very outgoing sort of person. And it was very easy to underestimate the intellect behind that bubbly personality. Mm-hmm. But you do so at your peril. And I've seen many people who fell into the, oh, he's not very bright sort of trap, which they realized too late. And they were beaten.
Hmm. So what was he like when you met him? How would you characterize him? You've known him a long time, so.
I have. He was very excited about Maryland politics, and he was very interested in finding new candidates. He believed in bringing young people along so that we would have a steady line of people ready to run for office and to serve. And he was willing to spend time and energy to make those kinds of things happen.
So, he came to the Eastern Shore. What was it like? I mean, he came from Baltimore. That was a pretty dramatic change.
Yes, it was. He, sort of strangely, Mike moved twice because of my job. We moved from Baltimore to Anne Arundel County because I took a job in Anne Arundel. And then we moved to Salisbury because I took a job at the Life Crisis Center. And he thought that was wonderful. He was always up. If I had a job in Paris, we would have been living in Paris. Because Mike was always interested in a new place and in new people.
Hmm. So how did he interact with the Eastern Shore? I mean, quite a dramatic change from
he loved
big
it.
City. Yeah,
he absolutely loved it. For him, it was first of all, Mike was a boater. He had 5 boats. We had a kayak and a canoe and a sunfish and a sailboat and a powerboat. And we dragged those 5 boats everywhere we went. And he loved the water, and he loved being on the water, and it was just perfect for him.
How did he take to, say, the people of the Eastern Shore?
Loved them too.
Yeah.
Mike never met a person he did not like. He could have huge arguments about politics or the environment or whatever. And it was just that it was intellectual to him. And then the next day he would be delighted to talk to the same person like the day before had never happened.
So, John, he was obviously somebody important in terms of the environment. He was certainly an strong advocate for it. Tell me a little bit about him and how you ran into him.
Well, I ran into him in 2004. We were having our WET, the Wicomico Environmental Trust, was having its first attempt at a strategic planning. And we had a meeting scheduled for the second floor above Chesapeake East down by the river. And Mike came. We had to wade through water that was, I remember, more than ankle deep to get into the building. So it was sort of similar to what's happening the past few days down in the waterfront. He was there at that meeting, and I just met him. We stumbled through that meeting and figured out where WET wanted to go. And then a few months later, I had an invitation to go with my brother-in-law, John Page Williams, with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation on a canoe trip. And I wasn't able to do it. I had some conflict, and I said, Mike, would you like to go? Well, I made friends with Mike from that day onward. He loved being with John Page. The two of them hit it off. He learned a lot about the Chesapeake Bay, and that's how we met. And from then on, it was all uphill. And as Michelle says, Mike loved to argue. He and I had some unbelievable arguments during board meetings that I think the rest of the board was ducking under the table, and you'd come out of it and everything was fine again. He was very upfront and just a tremendously hard worker. It was sort of unbelievable what he did for WET. And as time went on, we got into there was a lot of sprawl development going on, and he never hesitated to take on something that we felt was not the best interest of the county or to the environment. And the biggest one, of course, was a case over in Whiten, where a group of developers out of the country were funneling money through New Jersey down to here to put in a huge development in Whiten, which was totally inappropriate in an isolated spot. And we took it on. Mike fought the battle. We lost in the we won in the local planning and zoning, lost in an appeal which they had, and he took it to the circuit court or the Court of Special Appeals and won a tremendous victory there that would have been a disaster for the county and probably for the developer, because very shortly after the market tanked and we'd have had a mess down in the southeastern corner of the county in a rural area. So.
He came home from that meeting, and it was 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And I said, this is a really long meeting. And he grinned and he said, we're going to make some law. And he was very excited about having the Court of Special Appeals say that just because a developer had spent money to make plans didn't mean that the county had to go along with that. And it's significant for land use.
He began with knowing almost nothing, as far as I could tell, about land use. None of us did. And in terms of a quick learner, he got up to speed on land use and could duke it out with the best of them. He was absolutely a brilliant guy and loved to. He would be up at 4 a.m. reading case law, getting ready for these cases. And I never knew where he got all the energy, because he'd look at what he'd said. He'd watch old movies on television as he was writing his briefs, which would go on from 4 a.m. till I don't know when. But his energy was just sort of unbelievable.
So Michelle, where did he get that energy?
I don't know. And let me tell you that I was not up at 4 o'clock in the morning while he wrote these briefs. Every day he had this schedule. He would be up at 4 or 5 o'clock, as John said, and he would write until 8. And at 8 he would stop and eat his breakfast. Now, you would get an email from him that said that he sent it at 4:30 in the morning. But he ate breakfast at 8 o'clock, and he went back to his desk and worked until noon. And then he would have his lunch, and in the afternoon he went out. And he got the boats out, or he cut the grass, or whatever he was doing outside. And that was his time between noon and 5 o'clock to be outside every day.
He was a very good writer and an excellent editor. I would, before we got some of our other editors, I would always send anything I wrote to Mike for editing. He did very, very well on editing your work and making it clearer and more concise. He was very brilliant at that too.
The other thing that struck me is that he seemed to be involved in all kinds of organizations, that it wasn't just strictly the environment, that he ran out and helped various organizations get their say their nonprofit status.
Over 100 organizations Mike applied for and received their 501c3 status. And a number of those he incorporated as well. There are nationally probably a dozen gun control groups. Things like Nebraskans Against Handgun Abuse, and just very incredible numbers of organizations. Gun control was a big issue for him. And he worked very hard on it. The first statewide organization in Maryland for gun control was Marylanders Against Handgun Abuse. And Mike incorporated them and got their 501c3 status. And worked with the executive director. I think it's now called something else. I don't remember what it's called, but it has another name now. But Maryland was one of the first states to really have significant kinds of handgun control. And Mike was responsible for helping to create a lot of the bills that eventually became law in Maryland.
By the way, how did he relate to the lawmakers and what was the interaction like in Annapolis?
He hated going to Annapolis. During the legislative session, I used to spend a lot of time in Annapolis, and I liked it. But Mike did not like going to Annapolis. Mike would much rather create the bill and let somebody else lobby it, because he did not like, you waste a lot of time in Annapolis. You sit around a lot waiting for your bill to be called. You spend a lot of time chasing legislators to try to get to talk to them. And Mike saw it as a waste of his time.
Did they like him?
Yeah.
I mean,
Mike was a very likable person. There are very few people whom I can name who didn't really like Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was very good at relating to people. He understood that it was a difference of opinion. And it didn't mean that you couldn't like another person simply because you didn't agree with them.
Hmm.
He wasn't liked by one local blogger who one time described him as a Bolshevik tree hugger. Mike and I always laughed about that. He was sort of proud, it almost wore it on his chest. Not that he was, but it was a very funny.
Mike was a big capitalist, yeah, but he just loved it. There was somebody else who called him Red Mike, because of course, if you believed that government should control some things,
right,
then you immediately were a communist. And Mike didn't really care. You could call him that, because he knew he was a capitalist.
So how did he get along with, say, conservative groups? I mean, I think I saw a quote where he said that he was a great admirer of Bill Buckley, and that sort of kept us all honest.
One way he did it, I can put it, he one time got a 501c3 for a group, and I forget what kind it was. I thought it was a gun rights group, but I'm not sure anymore. He got their 501c3, and I said, Mike, why did you ever get work for them? And he did all this work pro bono. He never took a cent for it. And he said, well, we need them to keep us honest. And I always admired him for that he could step aside and look at everything and at the larger picture and say, yeah, we need each other to keep each other honest. He meant it.
Did you see him having that kind of interaction?
Oh, absolutely. There were a number of organizations whose 501c3 status he got that he had, absolutely no interest in whatever their issue was, or B, he had an interest which was the antithesis of what these people stood for. And he said that the law does not specify what your position is. You get a 501c3 for one reason alone, because you ease the burden of government. And that comes directly from the IRS regs. And he used that phrase often. How do you ease the burden of government? And it didn't matter which side you were on if you met the standard.
How did he get along with, say, the local Republicans? You mentioned him. Obviously, there was a blogger who didn't like him, but I mean, what did the Republicans think of him?
Actually, the blogger did not like him.
Oh, okay.
They got along wonderfully. It's just that he thought that Mike was wrong,
Right.
and Mike thought just as strongly that he was wrong. I can't name someone who really didn't like Mike, including his first wife,
Right.
who was at his funeral. And, I mean, it's just, he was a very likable man because he was very non-judgmental. I don't think I know anybody who is as non-judgmental as Mike.
Now, you just mentioned a moment ago that he obviously was involved in certainly our show. He was a regular. But also he got involved with saving the station. Tell me a bit about that.
It was at the holidays, so Christmas holidays, we had a group of people at our house for brunch for the specific reason of talking about saving the radio station. Mike was very serious about it and actually went to a number of different places in the area. He went to Easton and he went to somewhere in Delaware to talk to people about making certain that the radio station stayed alive and raised some money. And he incorporated the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio. He also applied for and received their 501c3 status so that the group could continue to raise money to support the station and also to make certain that the station remained alive and as a part of Salisbury University.
Because I know at one point he actually stood up and made a presentation. I remember that.
Yes.
So, John, I mean, what do you remember from those efforts to save the station?
I wasn't involved with that. My wife was. Kathy was with the group
Right,
to
exactly.
try and save it. I just remember that it was in grave danger of being sold to make some the license, I guess you call it,
Right.
to be spun off we listened to it almost religiously. It was on all the time at home because of the classical music, which we both love, and the news that was good, and the programming. And we're very upset because it might be leaving. It was we thought it was one of the cultural gems of the shore, and it still is. Without it, I think life here would be much poorer. And I remember Mike taking the lead on all of the legal technicalities that were involved, and basically just working very, very hard as he did on anything. We used to laugh because we'd be having a wet board meeting, and somebody would walk down the hall and wave, and the next thing they knew, they were on the board. So that's the way Mike sort of operated. We had to sort of put some brakes on him after a while. But he was just, he never met a meeting he didn't like or a person he didn't like. I really think that. He loved me. We would have meetings and heaven help us, another meeting, Mike was there. I mean, it was just unbelievable where he found the energy and time to take on things.
Karen, I want to turn to you. So what was your involvement? What was your interaction? How did you first meet him?
Well, I'm on the board of directors for Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Eastern Shore. And it was June 15th, 2016, and our group had been around Salisbury and the Eastern Shore for a long time, operating under Baltimore's licenses from the national organization. And we got a letter, and it said on June 15th, on July 1st, we're going to close you down. And it's like, what? And very little explanation or anything. We had 3 employees working in Salisbury and 100 children who were matched with mentors. And they would lose that relationship and all that support. And we're like, well, gosh, what do we do? We didn't even have a bank account. So we decided to have a meeting and try to get a few more people involved. One of the first meetings, Mike showed up. I'm not even sure who brought him in because I really didn't know him very well. And he built consensus among us, got us on the right track, and worked with the other board of directors so that we decided what to do. And he led us through the whole process of getting reorganized, getting our nonprofit status, getting our corporate status, and even harder was to be recognized by the national Big Brothers Big Sisters because we were so small. They said small groups don't make it. And he stood by us, and I just couldn't believe it. October 2016, we got all our licenses and approvals, and we hired our first people in November of that year, and it's moved on ever since. We're serving twice as many kids right now. We've gotten a huge grant from the local LMB to serve children with incarcerated parents. And we just got a large grant from the U.S. Department of Justice to serve families, children who were affected by the opioid crisis. And that's a 3-year grant that's just going to help us so much. But it was amazing to see a group that was going to go down, and within 3 months he had us on the right track. He stuck with us, and then he did the nicest thing. He said, I can't keep doing this. It's taking too much time. I have other issues, but I'm going to give you my wife, Michelle. And Michelle's also on the board at Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Eastern Shore and very active in that, and we certainly have appreciated all those services and things. But Mike was a tremendous. He not only loved the environment, he loved children too, and it made a big, big, big difference.
So, Michelle, how did you feel when you got drafted?
It is not the first time. Mike and I were a good partnership because Mike knew the legal half of the workings of nonprofits, and I've been a nonprofit executive for 40 years. So I knew the other side, the day-to-day operations. And he would say, well, I think you should do these things this way. And I would say, let me tell you about the real world.
Okay.
Because, in the real world, our product is mostly human beings. And when your product is human beings, you don't have really great quality control.
Right.
And, Mike was always someone who it was a good professional relationship in addition to everything else.
So, in terms of family, so how did your kids relate to him? What was all that like? I mean, we see the public face.
You know this, Don, that between us we have 7 daughters. And that's a lot of estrogen. My girls absolutely adored Mike. Mike's wonderful he said, I don't know anything about boys because they're all girls, and then I marry a woman who has all girls. And so we don't, we specialize in girls in our house. But, my daughters just love Mike. He was great with them. And when people would ask him how many kids he had, he'd always say 7.
So did they? They certainly clearly admired him from what I saw, for instance, at the service that we held here. Was there a special bond, do you think, between them and Mike? What?
Yeah, I think my youngest daughter is a lawyer, and so Mike was very proud of her, and he would often say, well, we got all these girls, and we got a doctor, and we got a lawyer, and an accountant.
Right.
We have all the professions covered. But he was very proud of those girls. And, just really thrilled when they would have when there would be some kind of new honor they received, or when they got a promotion. He just knew how to be a good mentor to all of them.
One of the things that I think we haven't mentioned in this, Michelle speaking there, it reminded me, Mike was very, very active in the Association for Lifelong Learning over at the Max Center. And he got into teaching a course on environmental law, I think at Salisbury University for one semester, and then moved over to the Association for Lifelong Learning, where he taught every semester, or every session they had, a long series of environmental courses, which took tremendous amounts of work and time. In fact, Michelle gave me some of his notes from that, and there are boxes full of, he would print out from the internet and his books that he bought, and he became very, very knowledgeable about the climate crisis, the environmental law, climate issues, and then he kept, and of course, he got no pay for this, any of this. And then he taught a course in Pete Seeger, I believe, because he loved Pete Seeger. Taught and not only that, he went to other people's courses. I taught a course there once, and he and Michelle were both in it every time they could be there, which just amazed me, because I don't know where he found the time. It was just, he loved to teach. He was excited about it. He had a great following at the Association for Lifelong Learning people, and did everybody. It was worth taking his course.
Well, what about that? I mean, he seemed to be giving, obviously, not only in terms of the nonprofits and obviously advocacy in various groups, but he also did he have a sense that he had an obligation to teach?
No, he loved it.
Yeah.
He came to it obviously very late in life, but he thoroughly enjoyed it. I have several dozen Pete Seeger albums, if anybody would like them. I'd like to get rid of them.
I don't think he'd like that, but that's okay.
It doesn't matter. They're
Right.
going out of my house. I have heard enough Pete Seeger to last me a lifetime. And also, he discovered one day, for some reason, that Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin were born on the same day. And he built a course around Lincoln and Darwin and how similar, because of the time, they were rationalists, both of them. And he taught a course on Lincoln and Darwin. And I also have a number of books, biographies of Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin. If something interested him, he would delve very deeply into it. And I mean, I probably have a dozen books on Lincoln and Darwin.
Well, I must say, by the way, he certainly was a regular here on Delmarva Today. When conservatives came on, they had to be prepared, and if they weren't, it was bad news. I think I recall talking about how I remember there was I think it was a State of the Union with. And the president had made a speech. And so I asked the Republican, and he gave, a couple minutes. And then I turned to Mike, and about like 3 or 4 minutes in, I realized that he had not even begun to go through this entire list. So he was someone who certainly was very passionate, but also enjoyed jousting with his Republican counterparts. We saw that certainly here on Delmarva. Well, I appreciate you all stopping by and chatting with him and chatting with us. And we have been speaking with Michelle Hughes, his wife, also John Grout, he's with the Wicomico Environmental Trust, and also Karen Bell with the Big Brothers Big Sisters here on the Eastern Shore. I appreciate you all stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.